So this is the board that we're going to be using. It is a 1x12 that is 5 feet. Some of the things you might notice, we do have some knots that are kind of built into there, but those things are going to be pretty small. We don't really have to worry about that. What we don't see is any cracks in this board, and I really just kind of like the way this grain looks. Hopefully we get good with it. Some of the things that we want to be concerned with, a little bit of this warpage that we have here, but that's not going to be that big of a deal because we're actually going to cut these things out. We'll do a diagram and we'll kind of show you where our little cut list is going to be. If we go to the other side here, you can see that side is a little bit flatter, but not really going to affect what we need because we're going to trim these things down.
So now what we're going to create is a little cut list off of that board that we just looked at. What I'm looking for on this paper is for basically the overall perimeter that thing's going to take up. I'm not worried about the angles, I'm not worried about all the little detail stuff. I'm just trying to get a general idea of where all these pieces are going to come from. One of the things that we're really going to look for is that on the legs, okay, it tells us here that we want to cut them 2 5/8 and then 25 inches. So kind of a little key that we kind of have in with these things. So we're just going to kind of lay out and do a little cut list of everything. Every box on this thing is going to represent 2 inches. I can't do the full length. I would need 60 boxes, and I only have, I think, 52 on here. So we're going to make every box represent 2 inches.
When laying these out, you should always take your biggest pieces first. In this case, it's going to be our legs. They are going to be 25 inches long, which means on these, we're going to have to go down 12.5 boxes. Once you get the 12.5, you have to get the width of it. On this, it's going to be about 1.5 boxes for each leg.
Do that. We're going to see how many legs we can get out. If I'm 2.5 here, I need to go right here. We can get another set. All 4 legs out of here. 2, leg 3, leg 4. Probably the next biggest piece that we have is going to be this top piece. That's going to be 11.25. For all intents and purposes, we're just going to say that it's 12 inches. So we'll calculate these things. It's going to be a 12 by 12, always rounding up. We're going to go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So we're just going to draw this line across. That's going to be our little top piece right there. So now I've got my legs, I've got my top piece. I have this little brace which goes underneath that top piece there. And that is 6 9/16. It's almost 7 inches. So we'll go a half a box and then 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, and then we'll go a half a box, we'll say it's 7. And that's going to be the brace. That's the top brace right there. Okay, we've got our 4 legs, we've got our top brace, we've got our top. The only thing that's left is that piece. And that's this one. This is 9 3/4. We might say it's 10 inches. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And we're going to say this is the bottom brace. So you can see here that we've got all of our pieces. We should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 7 pieces. That's how much is going to be in this bar stool. We now have everything laid out, and we have some extra material. We can kind of move those around if we run into knots or anything like that on our board. One thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to lay out everything here on that board. I'm going to look at these things so I can make cuts that go straight across. So the first thing I'm going to start with is making the cut across here, and then I can rip those legs down, and then I can work my way through. I always make sure that I cut my larger pieces first, because if I make a mistake here, I can turn that into some of these other pieces there.
We want to make sure we're working with a square end. What we're going to do is trim off just a small little corner there to make sure that we have a nice square end on this board. Now we're going to mark the 25 inches for the legs. We're going to grab a square to make sure we have a nice straight line, and then make our cut. When I make the cut, you'll notice I score the top, and then I push the blade all the way down to complete the cut. That makes a nice clean cut and eliminates any tear out that can be on that board. We're going to adjust our table saw to the 2 5/8 that we need, and we'll go ahead and lock that blade down. As we're making our cut, we're using our hands to push the board in initially, and then grabbing that push stick to push it through the rest of the way. We can continue this by pulling the board out, replacing that board back up against the fence, and then pushing all of our pieces through. Once we get down to the last cut, I want to make sure it's pushed up against that fence, but I don't want my fingers in the way, so I remove my. When you're lining up the blade on a miter saw, you want to make sure the blade is on the waist side. In this case, it's the left-hand side, making sure that that line is right on the edge of the blade. That makes sure that our cut is accurate. Once we have the piece cut, we can stick it through the table saw, measuring the length. We can cut and trim all the sides to make sure we have a nice and square piece. So there's one thing I want to kind of make note of. Do you see the way this grain is kind of going around? If you can kind of imagine this as being part of the tree, the center of the tree is going to be somewhere kind of right in here. This board is bowing out. On this side, that's where that bark would be. Wood is always going to bend and, you know, kind of cup a little bit, always towards the outside where that bark was at. So if this was like a deck material, you're going to have some of this cupping. The important thing would be to make sure that this is on the top, so that way it doesn't create a cup that's going to hold water. It would basically shed that water off. So now we've got all of our pieces here that we had laid out on our little paper there. And now we're going to start doing kind of these fine details. Probably going to focus in on the legs first.
The next thing that we're going to work on is the leg angles that we have here. Now, on our paper, it tells us that our leg angles should be 212. What that has to do is basically rise over run. We can do that with a couple different tools, one of them being a framing square, okay? And essentially what that is, when we're dealing with 212s, is rise over run. So we're saying for every 12 inches we go across, we're gonna come up 2 inches. Now it's important to note on these combination squares that when we take our readings that we're taking that same line, so either this line or that line, and that we're reading the numbers on both the inside or we're reading the numbers on both the outside. Because of where that 0 point is on this framing square, that could change things. So I prefer to use the inside.
Now on here, you're gonna see what we're gonna do. We're looking for 3 kind of points. We're looking for the 2 to be on that line. We're looking for the 12 to be on our line. And then we're looking for this stuff to just be right on that outside corner there. Now, doesn't matter which side I mark, these lines are parallel to each other, so it's irrelevant when I'm, you know, no matter what I read the numbers, I can mark either side there. So, we're on that 2. We're not on the 12, we're gonna make that adjustment there. Now we're on that 12, we're gonna check our 2 again. We'll probably need a slight adjustment on that 2. And then we're pretty close to an inch. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and mark this. Now, this is where the real magic kind of comes in. Because on our paper here, we know we want our leg to be 2 feet, okay? So even though we cut it at 25 inches, now we're gonna actually take that measurement. When we measure this, we're gonna measure 2 feet or 24 inches from the very edge. And we're gonna mark that down there. Now, the trick with this thing is we want a parallelogram. We're not looking for a trapezoid, okay? We want these angles to be basically tilted, okay? So we want to make sure that this angle matches up with that angle. They're not opposite each other. To do that, what we can do
If you remember how we stuck this thing 2 and 12, you can simply lift this thing up, rotate it 180 degrees, and you can set this back down. We're gonna do the same thing all the way down here. We're gonna set up on the 2, set up on 12. Again, I'm on the same line, it doesn't matter. And then this inside corner this time, we wanna set that up right on our mark. Once we get all 3 points aligned, we can mark that thing down, and now we've got our parallelogram. Another way for us to mark this stuff is using this speed square. Now the speed square is kind of nice because we have this little pivot point right here, and then we have, if we're dealing with common rafters, we've got these things here. That's going to be a rise of 12 inches for whatever. If it's a 12, 112, we're going to go here, 212, 312, 412. These things basically already do the math for you. So on these things, kind of like before, if we want to have these angles, we can stick this thing on the edge, and it'll bring you over here to where we can see a little bit better. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this thing up on that edge, and then all we want to do is we want to move this until that 2 right there is on the edge of our board. Let's see if we can let you see that right there. Once we have that there, we're simply just going to mark and scribe our line across. You can see that our lines now are kind of lining up. We've got another tool here that we can use. It's called the sliding T-bevel. You can actually use these things to find angles, repeat angles. If I wanted to take this, we can take it like this. We can simply get that lined up with that line that we have. If it's an existing cut, we can do that. We can lock this thing down, and now that is that 212 angle, and we can transfer this wherever we want. So we're gonna go ahead and we'll measure out the rest of these things. There we go. One quick visual check that we do, line everything up, make sure that those lines all line up, make sure that those lines all line up. It looks pretty uniform, like it's one straight line. That's how you know all your angles are correct and your lengths are all equal. What we're looking for after we get kind of an angle that seems like it's about right, we can kind of bring this thing down and we can kind of look at that. It looks like that may be pretty close, so we'll go ahead, we're just going to lock this down. We'll make a cut real quick away from that line. And now what we can do is we can measure from there to there. If that measurement is equal to there, we know we have the right angle. We're going to leave this thing in place and we'll make the rest of our cuts. So everything is good, it's all equal. We'll make cuts now. So on here, you'll notice that we're gonna go a ½ an inch in on either side. The depth it doesn't give us, but we know that this thing is gonna have to fit up underneath that piece right there. So we know that that board being a 1x12, then it's actually 3/4 of an inch. So we're gonna go 3/4 of an inch down and then ½ an inch over. We could set up this combination square to kind of get that. We'll set our ½ an inch first. Go ahead and lay these out. We can readjust for our 3/4. Lock it back down, and now we'll go across here. Now that stuff's all there. The other thing we got to do is we want a 3/8 inch opening on this side. To be able to fit this, we are creating the tenon, and this is going to be the mortise on this other piece here, and that needs to be 3/8 of an inch in width. So what we're going to do is we're going to go 3/16 on either side. Because it's a 3/4 inch board, we got to take away 3/8 in total. So I'll set our gauge up to 3/16. Now we've got all that stuff marked out, we'll cut on a bandsaw. The next part is to get the notch. To do that, it needs to be at 9 inches on the angle. So you see how we can set up the framing square on the base and then mark it at the 9 inches. We're going to use the sliding T-bevel just like before to mark out for that notch. We're going to take the framing square. This notch needs to be 3/4 of an inch out, so we're going to mark it on the 3/4 inches there, and then we're going to go and mark 3/4 of an inch depth for the thickness of the board. We can take our sliding T-bevel and we can mark right up to that line there. We're going to use the bandsaw like before to make our cuts. We're going to cut along both edges, and then we're going to make a bunch of relief cuts in the middle, so that way we can chisel the rest of that stuff out. We can now take a wood chisel and all those chips, we can move it back and forth and it breaks a lot of those chips out. And using the small wood chisel, we can clean up a little bit more. We're going to use the file to do some fine tuning and cleaning up. We can test fit our board in there. That goes in. Notice how I can shake it and it doesn't come out. That's how you want the joint to be. If you had issues with it fitting, you could take a wood rasp and you can open it up a little bit wider. We're going to repeat this process on all 4 of the legs, cleaning out all of those chips. We're going to end the video here and I will give you part 2 of the stool build.